Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Philosophy of X here on the Aspect Network. I'm your host, Alex Batts, and I'll be your guide as we take a journey to examine the world of X-Men through philosophy. So, for this week's episode, I'll be putting the spotlight on one of my favorite X-Men characters, someone who got a recent revitalization thanks to what is, in my opinion, the greatest retcon in the history of Big Two comics. Today, I'll be discussing Moira McTaggart, also referred to as Moira X, and her many lives. As usual, I'll first be giving a brief overview of Moira as a character to introduce her for those unfamiliar and to lay out the main ways that reincarnation will be pertinent to her. It'll be incredibly obvious very quickly. After that, I'll dive into some of the basic ideas of reincarnation as a concept, and then I'll circle back to an overall discussion of the two together. So, with that said, let's dive into Moira X. So, Moira McTaggart, also known as Moira X, and then back to Moira McTaggart eventually, is a longtime supporting character of the X-Men. For the majority of her history, up until 2019, she was a human ally of the X-Men, a renowned biologist, scientist, researcher, basically whatever medical or scientific field or role she needed to fit for a given story, she would fit it. She also had an on-again, off-again romance with Xavier, and is also one of the few characters who met him before his founding of the X-Men, back at the same trip when Xavier first met Magneto, long before the two would be known as Professor X and Magneto. I'm going to be skipping over the majority of Moira's publication history because even though she's great and there's absolutely some interesting stuff throughout those years, her story as it is now really picks up with the retcon in 2019's House of X number 2. I already mentioned that this is, in my opinion, the greatest retcon in Big Two comics history, and it is an absolute doozy. So, as I said, for the majority of Moira's history, she was a human ally to the mutants. Well, with House of X number 2, written by Jonathan Hickman, with art by Pepe Larraz, that all changes. House of X number 2 was the third issue released in the House of X Powers of 10 series that served as a relaunch for the entire X-Men line. It's also the crux that the entire relaunch rests upon. It's a revelation. House of X number 2 establishes that Moira McTaggart is, in fact, a mutant. Her mutant power is revealed to be reincarnation. Whenever she dies, she is reborn, fully conscious, in utero, with the full recollection of her past life. I'm just going to read the first page and part of the second page of the issue because, firstly, it's arguably my favorite single issue of all time, but also because it masterfully sets the stage for the story to come. Quote, "When she was 13 years old, Moira fell ill. Her fever was high, unnaturally so, and the doctor's prognosis was not hopeful. The next day, almost miraculously, she was fine, better than ever, right as rain. Years later, she would marry, become a school teacher, and have 3 children, 2 boys, Callum and Dean, and 1 girl, Abigail. They would, in turn, have 8 children of their own, and to Moira's great joy, once every year the extended family would return home. Moira eventually died at the age of 74, when she passed away peacefully in her sleep. It was a good life, a human life. Predictable, mostly pleasant, and not extraordinary at all. Moira's second life began in utero. It was the womb birth of a fully sentient being who had perfect recollection of her prior life." End quote. The issue then goes on to explain how Moira's parents immediately noticed that she was special. Not just the way that she thought, though. It wasn't special that Moira was learning to walk, read, and speak early. She was born with the knowledge of how to do those things. They didn't know it, but she was a mutant. It's expanded that Moira had to be careful not to reveal too much of her gift for her parents' and peers' admiration, and hailing her as a prodigy and genius would soon turn to fear if she pulled the curtain back a little bit too far. She eventually pursued a life in academia, in a life of the mind, and later specifically concentrated her studies in the areas of psychology and biology. She wanted to understand what she was. She ran controlled experiments to prove that her memories were not a form or disorder of psychosis. She marked the existence of personal historical markers and discovered 2 things. If she simply performed her role in events as she did in her previous life, if she was a passive participant, then that event would proceed almost exactly as it had before. This proved that her memories were real. But if she became an active participant, then she could change what happened and the paths would diverge. She then addresses the reader directly, not for the first time in the issue. She says, quote, which you would think would be amazing. Who wouldn't want to fix all the mistakes you'd made in the past? Then again, that was before I knew what the observer effect was, and that simply by existing and watching, I was already changing everything. And what seemed to be a gift, something of a blessing, wasn't a blessing at all. It was a curse." End quote. A further narration box leads to important insight into what will then shape Moira's character. Quote, "Meeting the love of your life, already knowing every flaw they possess, along with the knowledge that they will never change, destroyed any chance of Moira recreating what she had in her first life. Familiarity breeds contempt, and her once husband could see it in her eyes. There would be no family for Moira in this life. No one to love, no one to be loved by, no children in the yard playing and laughing." End quote. She wondered if there were others like her out there. Then she saw a man on TV, Charles Xavier, outing himself as a mutant, and Moira knew that that's what she was. She took a flight to America, and then promptly died as it crashed into the ocean, and so ended her second life. In her third life, Moira aggressively pursued a life of science. She decided that being a mutant was a curse and sought to rid herself and the world of it. She developed a cure, and then Destiny intervened. By Destiny, I mean the character. Mystique and Destiny show up to her lab, kill her coworkers, and destroy the mutant cure. This scene is one of the best written in comics ever. Would that I could just sit here and quote the entire thing, but this section is already going to be running long, so I'll just get to the important stuff. Here, it's established that part of Moira's power cloaks her from detection by other mutants, which is a handy note for explaining why she has never been discovered as a mutant in any previous X-Men stories. Destiny tells her, quote, "Listen to me, child. My mutant name is Destiny, and I have the power to see the future, which is tricky with someone like you, since your mutant power is reincarnation. One might think that that would be impossible, seeing the future of someone who has potentially limitless, unending one. But here I am, child. See me." End quote. Destiny explains that Moira's cure doesn't stop at want, that the humans will take it and use it to eliminate every mutant in existence. Destiny says, quote, "I am much older than you are. My powers will have manifested full of the knowledge of what we have done. If you, once again, try to do this evil work against our people, like today, I will see the potential outcome of it and find you. Again, and if you try to kill me before I kill you, I will see my end coming and prevent it. You see, Moira, we are joined together now, you and I. You will know that I am out there, waiting for this version of you, and you, knowing that, have a choice. Change or die. Help your people, or I will annihilate you in all of your lives to come." End quote. Destiny further explains, quote, "You're a smart woman who is beginning to understand the potential of your power. You're starting to believe that you are in an eternal loop of some kind, that your powers give you a version of immortality. I want you to know they do not. I see 10 lives, Moira, maybe 11 if you make the right choice at the end, but that is all." End quote. So Moira is now given a ticking clock. There's a little bit more to this scene, but for the relevance of our conversation today, I don't need to get into it all, no matter how much I might like to. Moira is then killed, so ending her third life. I would love to get into the specifics of Moira's following lives, but as I already said, this section is going to be running long and you get the general idea. From here out, Moira spends her remaining lives trying to find a solution to the problem that she dubs the human-mutant dilemma. She tries a lot of things. She eliminates the entire Trask bloodline, the family responsible for creating the Sentinels, but this just leads her to the discovery that AI is like fire. It's not an invention, it's a discovery, and it will always be the ultimate antagonist for mutants on Earth. She tries teaming up with Xavier earlier, it succeeds for a time, then ultimately fails. She tries teaming up with Magneto, it succeeds for a time, then ultimately fails. She tries teaming up with Apocalypse, it succeeds for a longer time, but still ultimately fails. Then, with her time running out, in her 10th life, she decides to try something new. This is when she recruits Xavier and Magneto together, and they put the plan for Krakoa into motion. This is the building block of the first Krakoan age. Now, I don't need to get into the wider story of Krakoa, but before we jump into the philosophy of reincarnation, we're almost there, trust me, I do need to briefly touch on the mechanics of Moira's power because it'll be important in the final leg of our discussion. Though never established on the page, Jordan White, who was the editor of the X-Line for the Krakoan era, did confirm on an episode of the Cerebro podcast that the way that Moira's power works is slightly different to what you might expect. Typically, Marvel Comics utilizes the branching timeline method to create different worlds. Many readers assumed that each of Moira's lives is simply a separate timeline of the main 616 universe. There's even a couple of timeline data pages in House of X number 2 breaking down various points in her lives. This, however, isn't exactly the case. What actually happens every time Moira dies is that the entire 616 universe is reset to the moment of her birth. All of Moira's lives take place in the main, proper 616 universe. Everything that has happened in all of Marvel's publication history is simply the 10th life of Moira X, which, side note, is part of the reason that Moira X is such a perfect name for her. 10 lives, the X gene, X-Men, it's also good. But yeah, so her power is pretty wild, and the moral implications of the entire universe resetting to the moment of her birth when she dies is a lot, but we'll get into it. I could talk for hours more about the specifics of this issue, how her story evolves throughout the Krakoan era, and how it wraps up in Inferno and evolves there and then finally ends with Rise of the Powers of X, but those will possibly be future episodes, and we haven't the time or need for it right now. That said, we will be taking a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dive into the philosophy of reincarnation. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So this section will probably be a little bit shorter, and I'll end up probably just turning this section where I talk about the philosophy and then also tying it together into one section without another break. So yeah, let's jump into it. So though there's a lot that can be discussed regarding reincarnation, the basic premise I feel is fairly straightforward, and most people are at least somewhat familiar with it. Reincarnation is the idea that when one dies, they are reborn into a new life, and the cycle goes on as birth, death, and rebirth. There are specifics of divergent and different schools of thought regarding reincarnation, though. In Hinduism, it is believed that the soul, the Atman, is eternal and is reborn in a new body after death. The cycle continues until the soul achieves moksha, liberation from the cycle of reincarnation. In Hinduism, reincarnation is tied closely with the caste system, in which it is believed that your actions, or karma, impact where in the caste system you are born into. Your karma in your past life determines where in the caste system you are currently, and your karma in this life will impact when you're born into in the next life. The idea is to always strive to move higher up the system until achieving moksha. In Buddhism, reincarnation differs from its belief in Hinduism in a few ways. Buddhism does not believe that the self is eternal, and the ultimate goal in reincarnation is to achieve enlightenment through good karma over many lifetimes. This also relates to the liberation of the cycle of death and rebirth. Karma is not seen as a moral judgment, but a law of cause and effect. Reincarnation is not really prevalent in many other religions and is in fact denounced by many. The other main philosophical idea relating to reincarnation that I wanted to touch on is the idea of the eternal recurrence or the eternal return. This is first posited by the Stoics in ancient Greece, and they believed that time eventually repeats itself over and over on an infinite loop, with everything occurring exactly as it already has, infinitely and forever. The idea was revived and popularized by Nietzsche, who described it as the eternal recurrence. Again, the idea being that you already have and will again be reborn into your life, and that it will play out exactly as it has, down to the most minute detail. Furthermore, he emphasizes that it is important to not only accept this, but to embrace and love the idea, to cherish the life that you have and lead a life that you would want to live infinitely and forever. So, as I said, that's most of the philosophical things that I kind of need to explain there, and it's a relatively straightforward concept. There's more that I could get into, but I think that you get the general grasp and know what we need to tie it back into Moira. So let's go ahead and do that. I think it should be fairly obvious how the ideas of reincarnation weave into Moira's story, considering it's literally her mutant power. But I think the specifics of how Moira reincarnates and what her lives entail are super interesting. It's fascinating that she maintains full recollection of her past lives. This is something that, upon first thought, might be something one could revere. To have lifetimes worth of knowledge is both incredibly useful, but also, as it's quickly described by Moira in House of X number 2, and further emphasized as the story progresses, that is a lot of trauma. She has lifetimes worth of intense trauma. Not only that, but some of her lives are exceptionally long, like centuries long. So not only does she have 9 lifetimes worth of memories, knowledge, and trauma, but some of those lifetimes are lifetimes in themselves. It's something that takes a massive toll on her character, and it's easy to understand why. It's also amplified by the fact that through her lifetimes, she's left with one conclusion in regards to the safety and flourishing of mutant kind. They always lose. Her 10th life is, as she understands it, her last shot, and she's not particularly hopeful. It makes her a bit cold and calculating, but she kind of has to be. It's also incredibly interesting to see how her relationships with everyone play out, because she has spent lifetimes knowing them. She arguably knows the entire cast of X-Men characters better than they know themselves. This is one of the areas where it's important to remember that her past lives are the main 616 universe. It's not that she knows offshoot, splintered timelines or parallel versions of these characters. She knows the main 616 versions of them intimately. And then there is also the moral implications of her actions in her subsequent life. There was a discussion that I was briefly a part of on Twitter the other day with a couple of mutuals of mine. I quickly bowed out because Twitter just is not the platform for long-form discussions. Nothing against my mutuals. If you're listening to this, you're super cool. But the topic of discussion was whether or not Moira is morally in the right or wrong for steering her later lives towards her own goals. One of the main points of contention being brought up was that by changing events, she is altering or erasing millions, billions, or potentially trillions of lives from being born if she were to choose to not alter things and let things play out as they did in her first life. I don't think that I agree with this line of logic. My first instinct is to say that she's not erasing anyone from existing. They already did exist in her first life, and it's not her fault that the universe gets reset at the moment of her death. That's something entirely out of her control and something she did not ask for. Secondly, I think for the most part, her goals are not necessarily altruistic, but at least a relatively good one. She's trying to find a solution to mutants and humans existing peacefully. She isn't trying to achieve mutant supremacy. She just doesn't want her kind to go extinct. That's a good aim to fight for generally, I think. Now, one could definitely argue that some of her actions taken in her lives is not morally sound. She has done some terrible things. I mean, she literally eliminates an entire bloodline in one of her lives. You know, that's not great. But I think that the decision to act differently than in her first life is not an inherently morally corrupt one. One of the arguments posited was that the morally best and least messy solution would be for her to develop the mutant cure and use it on herself immediately, thus ending her cycle of death and reincarnation and resetting of the universe. To this, I simply cite the on-page rebuttal for using the cure that is provided by Destiny and Mystique. The cure doesn't stop at want. Humans would use it to eliminate all mutants. Moira must play with the hand that she's dealt, therefore she's going to pursue her own ends in future lives. I think the story successfully sidesteps some level of moral culpability for Moira by establishing that 1, it's not like she chose this power and she can't use it on a whim. It's triggered by her death. 2, Destiny early on in her lives forces her to align herself with a cause that is not entirely and inherently selfish. And 3, she's put on a time limit. She is not given unlimited tries to just be casual in her experimentation. Now, this isn't to say that she isn't morally responsible for a lot of her actions. Of course she is. But I don't think it's necessarily fair to hang the deaths or the not births of billions or trillions of lives on her hands because she decides to not live the exact same life over and over again. But that brings me back to, I think, the final thing that I want to talk about, which is tying back into the idea of the eternal recurrence. And it's mostly just questions for you, listener. How do you feel about the idea of the eternal recurrence? If it were true, do you think you're living a life that you would be satisfied with reliving eternally? If not, what changes can you make to ensure that it is one you would be satisfied with living? How do you think you would react if you were in Moira's position, with the full knowledge of your past lives? Would the burden of memory be too much? How would you move forward with a limited timeline of lives? Do you think that she's justified in choosing to act as she does, changing things and therefore changing the universe, with her alone being the sole person who knows that anything is different? Moira's story has become one of the most fascinating to me in all of comics. I frequently find myself rereading House of X #2. If there is one thing that you take away from this podcast, besides the fact that you should read House of X and Powers in 10 as a whole, it's that you should absolutely read this single issue. It's standalone enough that you can just read it by itself and get a great story, and I really, truly cannot recommend it enough. It's phenomenal, it's a revelation in what it does for the world of the X-Men, and it's just packed full of incredible ideas and tough questions. So, I think that just about wraps it up for this episode. Moira's truth is profound and life-changing, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Philosophy of X, and I'm keeping next episode's topic a mystery for now. You can find me online at APBatman with 2 T's, and please be sure to subscribe here to The Aspect on YouTube and any platform where podcasts can be found. Please give us a like, leave a comment, and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on Twitter/X, Instagram, and TikTok at The Aspect Co. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.